My name is Kevin Yuen Kit Lo, and I'm a graphic designer and educator. I run a small design studio called LOKI, and I teach at Concordia University in the Department of Design and Computation Arts. I've always enjoyed teaching. I've always liked doing research as well. I applied and I got the position, and it really just forced me to reflect on how I thought I could have the most impact in my day-to-day life. We, and when I say we, I mean the kind of institutions surrounding design. So the universities, the schools, the training centers, the colleges, and then professional organizations, et cetera. There's a really narrow understanding of what design is, although that's starting to change. I think, especially within graphic design specifically, there's such a relationship that is made between the histories of advertising, histories of commercial design practice, that discounts broader understanding of graphic design as a human activity, as just visual communication, and what role that can play in society. So when I'm speaking with my students, when I'm teaching, I'm trying to kind of disrupt at least, or deconstruct, or at least critique the canon of how we're taught graphic design as this kind of elitist culture of commercial production, of decoration, of purely stylistic approaches, and trying to connect those to actually like much broader histories of craft and making and communicating and culture and living. I think it's about having a broader understanding of design while at the same time also bringing in things that maybe weren't considered design before, traditions of craft and cultural knowledge that have been excluded from Western canon for a really, really long time. We work from a position of acknowledging the marginalized position that a lot of our collaborators, our clients, and ourselves are coming from. I think that the way design has been taught historically for a long time, there's been a push towards kind of this universalist approach to design, and that's only starting to break down now. And that prevents the lived experiences of communities that don't fit into that normalized universalism, which tends to be, white, cis, male, hetero. It prevents people outside of that sphere from being not just represented within the disciplines of design, but having access to that design, being able to engage with it, being able to feel validated in the types of work that they're already doing. The idea that, especially within graphic design, but also very much in user experience design and industrial design even, that one kind of totalizing approach, and we can see this very, very clearly in how, let's say, the 50s to the 90s in industrial and graphic design kind of worked within a Western context, that this one kind of approach is going to be suitable for everyone, is that in fact, like, not only is it not true, but can actually act in really oppressing ways. It can act in ways that erase the distinctiveness of individuals and their cultures and their traditions and their histories. And it also doesn't allow for a space that I think is really important in design, which is a space of contestation, right? So if you're coming from marginalized perspective, if you're coming from a community that is under-resourced or underrepresented, the fact of the matter is, within this world as it is now, is that you're gonna have to struggle. You're gonna have to fight. You're gonna have to fight against systems that are set down to keep you, quote unquote, in your place. So in design, how can that express itself? So design is always searching for consensus. Design is always searching to smooth things over, to make things understandable and easy. I can see design having a counter history if we think about protest graphics, if we think about community organizing models, if we think about intervention, if we think about sabotage. These are also design approaches. And so there needs to be a space of actually contesting that kind of universal vision with design. It was definitely a really challenging project. So the project itself, just to give a brief description of it, it was a research project on police profiling of racialized youth in the Saint-Michel neighborhood of Montreal. The researchers had been working collaboratively with youth there, with a youth research team, so that it was a peer-to-peer research groups already. the researchers were taking a very strong participatory approach, which was very commendable. And I think we're seeing more and more happening in research approaches and starting to see a little bit in design approaches. And so we were hired to deliver educational tools out of that research to make those kind of more dense and long kind of formal like text research accessible to a broader audience. We ended up creating a social media campaign based on the words of the youth and their experiences and the images that they wanted to create, and translating that into little vignettes that were then shared on Facebook, on social media, and created a kind of platform for the discussion of police profiling of racialized youth, of Black youth specifically. So rather than it being a kind of one-way communication where we're creating, let's say, a narrative about this situation, these issues about the police, it became a place where people could engage, and it became a place where we could share knowledge from other community organizations as well. So that project really, at least in my opinion, worked really well because it was a bridge between, let's say, more radical critiques of the police and policing and racial profiling, and more academic sort of studies of that. So research world and sociologists and stuff like that, and a general public that was just only starting to see the problems of over policing, starting to see the problems of racial profiling within their very own communities. And if we think about how things unrolled over the few years from when that project was initiated in 2017 till 2020, obviously in the States, but also here, Black Lives Matter movement, I think I'm very proud that I think that work contributed to building that awareness of problems with policing. So I think what I've realized, because I've also worked in much more commercial contexts and agencies, et cetera, the difference between how we do that and how we approach the work in the studio is just a really, really much more direct collaboration with the so-called client or collaborators, So it's always an ongoing conversation because there's a really key understanding, at least from me, that representation can be really, really damaging and also really, really powerful. We work really hard to be on the same page, and in order to do that, we needed to have the youth involved at many of the stages of the project, and to be consulting them directly and to making sure that they were happy with how things looked, how things read, how things felt. In this case, it was with the youth that were explaining and telling and sharing their experiences, and the researchers that were involved. I'd like to think, in all our projects, we have that engagement with the people that we're collaborating with, because they are people there where representation is really, really crucial, how they're represented, fighting against a certain normalized representation. Right? So we have to be very, very considerate of how they want to self-represent. I think what's interesting is that, often be pretty dogmatic about inclusivity, of like, we need one person of every color to come into this room. And our approach really wasn't that, it wasn't a question of like checking boxes. It was more a question of approach. And that approach was to engage in this kind of dialogue over a long term, and to also show, I think, like, it was a relatively brief campaign, but we maintained that community page voluntarily, for many years afterwards, right? And fed that with other information that was gathered from other community organizations as the kind of issue of police profiling continues, and continued at that point. And so I think one of the key things was not so much about inclusion in terms of like, okay, who's on the team at what point, but engaging in a relationship of like long-term commitment and trust, if not even to that specific project, but to the cause. I think trust is a big part of it, more so than even just inclusion.